All right, so welcome to our session on bringing your neurotechnology to life and topics on translation. So this is not a normal session at Brain. So we're not doing formal presentations in this one. This is a much more informal session. And if you are looking at translating out technologies, how do we do community engagement, prototyping, first in human, different ways of commercialization and translation, you are in the right room. So thrilled to have you here. And so the format is a little bit different. We're going to introduce each one of our panelists, talk about each one of their programs, and we're going to open it up for you. It's an Ask Me Anything. So, well, let's not go into anything, but we're going to keep it on topic, but ask on topic. So to start off, we do want to recognize that this is supported by the Dana Foundation. We appreciate their programs of neuroscience and society, and understanding and knowing what the Dana Foundation and the impact that they have in terms of particularly what we're doing in neurotechnology and the translation into humans and the translation of commercialization, I think has a big impact. So we appreciate their support for this program. So a little bit on the agenda. Believe me, I am not going to take 5 minutes. It'll be over with, and my introduction will be over much quicker than that because we want to get to the content. So here we have our four panelists. We have Eva Walia from who is the director of seedling programming at NeuroTech Harbor. It's one of the NIH Blueprint programs. We also have Katie Sale, who is the executive director of the American Brain Coalition. Vanessa Talusa, who is a hardware research manager at Reality Labs. She's going to talk a little bit about her weaving her way of building partnerships. And then we have April Maroney, who is the advisor for the Total Product Lifecycle Advisory Program, otherwise known as TAP at FDA. And then we're going to, like I said, open it up to you. So let's get to it. Let's meet our panelists today, shall we? So, Eva, you're up first.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about you. Tell us about your background, how you got to where you are today at NeuroTech Harbor.
Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you all the organizers and the audience. I recognize one of my sponsors here. So welcome also. Thank you for attending. So it's really a pleasure to be here. So I trained as a physician during my medical school. My interest had always been to be a geneticist, and I went through a residency at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine in psychiatry, and subsequently did my fellowship in neuroscience and in neurogenetics. So I was practicing earlier on in genetics of brain disorders, and it was towards about 2 years or 3 years into my initial career as a junior faculty that I lost my grandfather from complications of Alzheimer's disease. I was one of the caregivers, and I noted the deterioration in his function and the burden, the family faced. So at that point, I started thinking about how I can make a contribution to people going through this, or even preventing this from happening. As a flashback, I could recognize the early signs even before the cognitive changes happen. And so, the goal is then to see if we can develop, technologies that can help identify the condition early when it is still modifiable, and to develop technology that can treat, these conditions, but also develop a program or a platform that can help caregivers and families to handle the challenges and the burden of managing loved ones. So then I made a career change from genetics into Alzheimer's disease. But I was interested in developing technology. And then I started doing some drawings and studying some science, and then thinking about how I can put these ideas into, now I've identified the need, right? Putting these ideas into some form of technology that can be tested and, and then validated, and then tested in different organisms and humans, and then leading to commercialization. So during those early years, it took me 4 or 5 years to figure out all those things. And then neglecting so I'm a physician, right? So we all know that, and a scientist. I have no business training whatsoever. Nobody teaches you much about regulatory paths. So that is when I recognized that I have to branch out and meet people and pitch. And this led me into neurotech. So leveraging or looking back at the early ideas and the challenges I had, I thought of providing this lesson in a form of a program for people who have ideas and want to make a change in neurological conditions. So that is how we decided to put in this application when NIH solicitation for the Blueprint MedTech came out. And the program has been running for 2 years now. It's a program that we'll talk about later that addresses all these things that can help people who have gone through the ideas, identifying needs, to develop the technology and get a commercial market and put them out for the people in need. So that's my journey.
What a great journey. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So talk a little bit about NeuroTech Harbor and what can it do in terms of helping early stage technologies and really helping to marshal the technologies either from an idea or or helping with prototyping.
Yes. Well, so the NeuroTech Harbor was an idea from the NIH, and we bought into it very quickly. But the idea is, you now have an idea, you have some proof of concept, either from other R grants like R21 or other NIH mechanisms. You've developed some proof of principle that this idea can work, right? Now, the concept, the next stage is, will my technology work? And is there a motivated market available for this technology? And how will I navigate the regulatory pathway that will lead this product from, maybe first in animal studies to first in human studies? That is where the Blueprint MedTech comes in. So the Blueprint MedTech provides funding, mentorship, a whole array of resources that can help people answer those questions on regulatory pathways, development of the devices, verification, validation, first testing in animal studies, from benchtop to animal studies, and then first in human studies. The goal is to to help expedite or facilitate this process in a very, very short time period, 1 to 4 year period. So that's what the Blueprint MedTech NeuroTech Harbor does. It's an incubator hub to take the ideas from the technological development, commercial, as well as regulatory, into clinical studies.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks for explaining that. So what can someone do if they want to approach NeuroTech Harbor and apply? How does somebody go about doing that?
Yes. Great question. So I have some flyers there, and in the flyers you will see links to our resources. We run webinars, office hours every week. Our team, we have a very, very strong outreach core that actually want to meet you, even without you, before you make the initiative. It's possible. But we have solicitations every year. So if you go online at the Blueprint MedTech website and any of those links, you will be able to ask questions and receive answers. And there are office hours also that are available for you to ask questions. We always recommend meeting and talking to the NIH institutes that fund this program. There are about, top of my head, at least 8 NIH ICs. They are program officers in all these ICs who support this program. We always recommend that, you reach out to them, make sure you talk and get, advice from them about your idea. So just to see the program fit and to make program fit for the ICs because they ultimately fund it. But our goal is to help you through that process as well. So through talking to the program IC, program officers, and talking to us, you will, get all the answers you need from, everything about how to submit, how to, get information, and how to navigate the processes. We will, the office hours and webinars are really informative and helpful. So don't hesitate. Once you look at the flyers, look at our link, and then it's also shown here, the neurotechharbor.org. If you go on that site, you will see all office hours and webinars and programs that we have that can, answer your questions. And we are, available to talk, through Zoom or any mechanism possible. Thank you very much.
Question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. Are there any prerequisites? Like, do you already, do you already have to be a startup to join, or it should be pre-startup?
So, everybody, it's unfortunate that we're not showing my slides, but the solicitation is for anyone that has any idea. The prerequisite is that you are addressing nervous system conditions, that's brain conditions and, peripheral nervous system conditions, different diseases from stroke, Alzheimer's disease, spinal cord, problems, psychiatric conditions, behavioral conditions like addiction. So it's really a wide spectrum of, conditions. Yeah, so the prerequisite is that, it is new. It's in an early stage. You have an idea, you have addressed, the proof of concept, either through some other mechanisms, like self-funding mechanisms like the R21 and so forth are available. Then you now want to make the technology, and you want to find a market, and you want to, understand the regulatory part. That's where we come in.
Yeah, so could you give us an example of like some of your solicitations, or if there's specific focus areas on different areas of technology?
Yes, so it's really varied. So when we talk about devices, devices includes both diagnostic and treatment. So some of the conditions, some of the technologies are focused on, identifying, biomarkers, and then some are, focused on treatment. Some are a combination of those. They are mostly, majority of applications we get, like non-invasive, neuromodulatory stimulations, implants, subcutaneous implants, transvenous implants. Rarely do we have, anything very invasive, and a lot of them are, pretty much. In terms of regulatory part, a lot of them are between class 2 and class 3, if you understand those very well. But that's really the breadth, flavor of applications we get.
Great. Thanks, Ava. So think about questions that you might have for him a little bit later. We're going to introduce Katie. Katie Sale is the Executive Director of American Brain Coalition. Can you tell us a little bit about you and about the American Brain Coalition for us?
You bet. Thanks, Jen. So in a nutshell, I was working at the Society for Neuroscience 20-some years ago, and it was really the Society for Neuroscience and the American Academy of Neurology early on that said, we don't work with the disease-specific groups. We don't advocate together, we don't educate together, we don't have the same messaging together. We should be. So very early on, ABC was formed. And we were really formed with the premise of bringing together the groups, an umbrella organization for the brain, if you will. So, who we represent now are professional organizations like the Society for Neuroscience, American Academy of Neurology, American College of Neuropsychopharmacology, I might add, joined very early on, recognizing the importance of, when we say the brain, we truly mean the brain and mind. So that's important to clarify as well. And then we represent disease-specific organizations, big and small. So, rare diseases, small patient groups that are led by dedicated parents of their children have a very rare disease. Then we have, the large patient groups that you've all heard of that are very strong on the Hill, and we're not looking to replicate that at all, but we're looking to collaborate with all of them and to speak with the same messaging. We also work with government agencies like NIH and FDA, and we have strong partnerships there as well, collaborating and whatnot. Academic institutions, I almost forgot. We also work with academic institutions and industry partners. So both large pharmaceutical companies, small device companies, startup biotechs, so that, again, the same messaging on Capitol Hill comes through, collaborating comes through, so that, we do a piece of, sort of an educational piece in informing each other of our awareness days, of events that are going on within the brain community, so that we're all aware and can be stronger together and advocate better together.
Yeah, you mentioned the Hill, you
Yep.
mentioned your awareness days. Can you talk a little bit more about specifics of what you've done in the past and the impact that you can make in pulling a coalition together?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we teamed up with the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus 13 years ago, I think is what John and I said, and in really hosting a series of briefings on the Hill on the importance of neuroscience. So really, members of Congress and their staffers need to see neuroscience as an important funding source. And they can only do that by having these briefings and these meetings. And what we do is we really will bring a clinician, a neuroscientist, and then a person with lived experience, a patient advocacy group, to sort of bring that home. And I think that messaging is really important to them. And when they can see how many of their constituents are touched by these diseases and disorders is really when it makes an impact.
So talk a little bit about community engagement. You have lots of advocacy organizations underneath the umbrella of American Brain Coalition. Talk a little bit about how that interaction of technology development with the members of the community.
Sure, absolutely. So let me talk a little bit about what we do for the Brain Initiative and kind of start there, and then I'll talk a little bit about our regulatory front too. But we actively advocate for Brain Initiative, and you've probably heard us doing so. We most recently, obviously, we all know some of the funding cut issues, and we are fighting to make sure that Congress understands the importance of the Brain Initiative. So how are we doing that? We did hold a briefing on the Hill. It was really impactful, super important. Dr. Nye and many of the investigators were there, and that was great. We also, we had a day on the Hill that we were advocating and speaking with members of Congress, especially appropriators, and doing that as well. And we've been doing that. We've hosted or had meetings with, I think, close to 15 appropriators. So smaller meetings are really important, getting the messaging. We did written testimony that we've used as samples if others want to do the same. We have a community, and this is where I was kind of trying to get to. We have a community-led sign-on letter, close to 150 organizations signed on and showing the importance of all of us collaborating together and the importance of that. So when I say organizations, I truly mean that it was organizations, academic institutions, industry partners, both big and small, signed on to this and really showed that they truly want this funding to happen.
Great, fantastic. So think about some of the questions that you might ask Katie in terms of community engagement and working with the American Brain Coalition. Thanks, Katie. Vanessa. Vanessa Taluso, so you've had a really winding career. If you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today.
Sure, yeah. I've been very lucky, I feel like, in my career. So I'm an engineer by training. I started in Neurotech in grad school, where I was microfabricating silicon-based electrode arrays and then modifying them to become chemical sensors that measure neurotransmitters. I would walk over a building, this is in UCLA, building over with my neuroscience partner, who was also a student at the time, and she'd implant them and do data analysis. And ever since then, I've been partnering with neuroscientists throughout my career, actually. So from there, I got lucky, luck and hard work together, and joined a small, little-known group at Lawrence Livermore National Lab that was working on neurotech. It turns out that they were just coming off a program that started in the 90s, is starting to come to a close, where they were working with a company called Second Sight, and they had developed the polymer-based electrode arrays for stimulation of the retina for humans. So when I joined, it was on the tail end, and one of my roles was not only move the technology forward, but also look for new applications for this platform technology. We also had a facility, a clean room facility that was dedicated just for human devices, which was rare, still rare now, but even more rare then. And through that experience, that's when really I honed in on my having to partner across the fields. And I was there in 2013 when the Brain Initiative happened, and that changed the whole course, I think, for a lot of us. We were lucky enough to land 3 of the first 3 DARPA Brain Initiative projects and a couple of the NIH grants. And through that experience, I learned how to partner with a lot of academic institutions, neuroscientists, with clinicians, with industry, so Medtronic, Boston Scientific. We were developing devices for animals, humans, spinal cord, brain, different parts of the body, you name it. So it was a really rich experience there. And I'd say one of a couple of the things that made some of the partnerships more successful than others was one is complementary, partnering with groups that have complementary skills. So we were hardware partners, and we partnered with different groups as well. Like we were electrodes and packaging, you partner with people who are best in field in power or in battery technologies. Another thing that made some partnerships more successful than others is if you can come to your new collaborators. A lot of these were cold calls, they didn't know who we were in the beginning. If anyone had heard of us, they were like, what is a weapons lab doing at Society for Neuroscience? After a couple of years, people started to get to know us for the work that we were doing, but people were like, who are you guys? And they didn't believe us. No, really, we're already in humans. They're like, no, you're not with polymer devices. But so that was a hill we had to get over, was building the trust. But one thing that helped was coming with an agency or a funding grant that you could apply to together. So took advantage of the internal grants that Livermore was offering, and then also NIH and DARPA grants. So if you can come with partners there, and then if you can, from my experience, treat your partners well. When you find the good ones, and you just continue, and it works well when you're speaking the same language, when you have the same agenda, and you're really working as true partners. And I think that helped a lot of the success that we had while at Livermore. So I was there after 7 years. I ended up leaving for a startup to help found a company called Neuralink. And there I got to see the other point of view. Do human manufacturing. So partnered with Livermore from the industry side. I also partnered with a lot of universities, Dallas, Stanford, Berkeley, Davis. Basically, I called every company that, or every place that had a clean room or manufacturing facility, because I always get backups to backups to backups when you're a tight schedule. So lots of partnerships from the startup side. And then I also, from that experience, learned to work with other industry partners, with vendors. And a couple of the challenges I'd like to note there for people who are thinking about translational or going to startups is I think for us, it's really hard to convince vendors, one, to work on the same timeline as you. They're pretty slow in general, so you have to get creative in incentivizing them to work, align with your timeline. The second other challenge is a lot of these companies, we're small, we're like, the market is small. People didn't really know, or we were in stealth mode for the most part that I was there. So it's hard to convince them that, hey, can you do a little R&D for this thing that profitability, revenue might take many years, and the market is not an iPhone market. So how do you convince these companies to invest in these new areas and stretch their capabilities a little bit? So some of those things I kind of picked up on the way starting at a startup. And then lastly now I just kept going up the industry ladder, and now I'm a hardware research manager at Reality Labs. I wanted to experience wearables, what are the challenges in wearables, and what are the challenges to consumer products. And that's what, we're completely outside of the body at the work that we're doing there, that I'm doing there. And so more partnerships from there as well, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, so you mentioned some of the challenges and some of the lessons learned of the partnerships of making sure you have good collaborators, making sure that you treat your partners well. What are some of the dynamics that you've seen over the period of time of working with players between academia, industry, and government, because they all have different timelines, different objectives? What are some of the dynamics that you've experienced?
Yeah, what it comes down to is it's still relationships, like building relationships. They all have different, as you said, different strengths, different agendas. Recognizing that, and then knowing what you're going to that group for. For the government labs. In our case, it was specifically for early stage manufacturing and R&D. So government labs can't make devices for profit. So you have to have some other bridge that way. And another thing with them is that, as in most cases, is you want to find ways where there's mutual benefits. I mean, with every relationship. But really, the more you can come to the table with what's in it for them and what can you get out of it, the more they become more successful, the partnership, I think. So there's so many layers to that question that I could touch, but I'll stop there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Vanessa. So we're going to move on to April. April, tell us a little bit about your background. You're at FDA now, but how did you get there and involved in tell us a little bit more about the TAP program as well.
Sure. So thank you. So first of all, I'd like to say thank you to Jen French and to Katie Sell with ABC for coordinating this session, inviting me to be here, and the numerous other opportunities they've given me to spread the word about TAP. And of course, we'd like to say thank you to the Dana Foundation for supporting ABC, who is very supportive of TAP. So I'm April Marone. My current position is I am a TAP advisor, so I'm with the Total Product Lifecycle Advisory Program, also known as TAP, which is a program in FDA's Center for Devices and Radiological Health. So it is a program for medical devices. I've been with CDRH for 9 years, FDA 10 years. I'm a chemist by training, a PhD in chemistry, bachelor's in physics, so kind of a hardcore scientist up until joining the FDA in 2013. And I was in basic scientific research in academic settings for about 10 years before I did that. So I ended up at the FDA kind of luck, right? So as Vanessa said, hard work and luck really go hand in hand. And just really kind of wanting to take that basic research and do something that was a little bit more immediately impactful, so a little bit selfish, I guess, for that reason. And I found my home at CDRH, left the lab, haven't done research since then, but I really enjoyed, having the impact on, industry and having that voice in the way the FDA can. I was in the obesity and metabolic disease space before I joined TAP. But then when TAP came along about, I guess it's 18 months ago, it's a brand new program within the center, and there's not many opportunities in government to kind of be at the ground level of such a great program. So it was really an opportunity I could not pass up. But let me tell you a little bit about what TAP is. So the basic idea for TAP is that we want innovators of novel medical devices that have FDA's breakthrough designation, and the evidence supports that they should have that designation and should be in the hands of patients to be there for patients, so to have that adoption by and we've acknowledged that this for the med system pretty long siloed process. There's many stakeholders along that journey whose needs you really need to meet to get that all success, and that is really our surrogate. We've seen oftentimes, I've seen it personally with the work I've done, innovators come to the FDA, they're able to meet FDA's regulatory burden, so safety and effectiveness, but then they kind of languish post-FDA before reaching that successful commercialization, because now they have stakeholders such as payers that have their requirements to be able to make positive reimbursement decisions. They have physicians that need to make the decision that these are devices that are going to be beneficial to their patients, and they have patients that are going to be involved in their treatment decision making and are going to accept the benefits of that device for the risks. And these different stakeholders have different levels of evidence that they need to say yes. And so we want our innovators to, one, know this, and to be having conversations with these stakeholders in their ecosystem really early on in their development process, so then they can kind of understand what is this level of evidence I need, and start optimizing those evidence collection strategies earlier on in development. So when you're anticipating the risk and you're setting up strategies to mitigate that risk for then that success downstream, or changing course if the information that you're getting really says that that's the best way to move forward. So the way we do that, operationally, is so we are enrolling devices into TAP on a per device basis. So an innovator who has a device who's in an area of CDRH where TAP is operational. So right now it's in cardiovascular and neurological and physical medicine. We will be expanding at the next turn of the fiscal year, so in October, to other areas to be announced. So stay tuned for that. But if you're in that area and you have breakthrough designation, you can voluntarily enroll in TAP if you meet the other criteria. So being early in development, being a device, not a combination product, and a few other criteria that I can go into detail if it's helpful later on. And then if you're in, you get assigned a TAP advisor to work with you, and then we're really relationship builders and listeners. So we're going to help you engage with our FDA staff that really know the regulatory stuff, and we're going to help you engage with then other stakeholders who have agreed to collaborate with TAP, and then help our innovators kind of resolve that feedback into a set of clinical and regulatory options based on what they want to do, so based on their decisions. We're not there to tell them what to do, but just help them gather the information so they can make the most informed decisions on how they want to move forward. So let me stop there. I feel like I've been talking for a minute, and see what questions you have.
So this is a unique program, something very different from what FDA has done in the past. But can you talk a little bit about, you talked about the enrollment and kind of the process, but what can people expect? Give us examples of ways that you might be able to make connections for some of the people that are within the program. I know you can't talk about specifics, but give us some kind of broader examples.
Sure. So we're a new program, and we're a pilot all throughout our medical device user fee amendment period. So it's a 5-year period, and that's really great because we can kind of figure things out as we go, and we can also very much pivot dynamically in response to real-time feedback. So the way this kind of looks, I guess I'll say at a personal level with an innovator, is so we have a set of discussions just trying to figure out where the innovators are at. So what have they done? What are they doing now? What are their plans for the future? Where do they want to be when they grow up? And then we work with them to help identify then who they should be talking to and when they should be talking to them. So for example, they may need to be talking to professional societies, but maybe that's not the first step. Maybe they need to start having a little bit of conversations with some of our payment or reimbursement subject matter experts to help them kind of get that reimbursement strategy at least somewhat scoped, so they then kind of understand, okay, where am I going to be then fitting into the landscape. So this is kind of an iterative process. So for example, when it comes to patient engagement, obviously, the patient voice and device development is very valuable. If you're developing a device that's intended to address a population, getting that input from patients is very important. So we help, find those patient organizations that either newly collaborating with CDRH or already collaborating through existing mechanisms, and really help facilitate those connections. So an example can be what endpoints are important to patients when it comes to my technology, and having those conversations can then help build those endpoints into a clinical trial design that can be then supportive of something of the types of data that patients would want to see. And also a lot of other stakeholders want to see, health outcomes that are important to patients as well to make their decisions.
So is there a timeline of when sponsors can be in the program? Is there a timeline that you kind of cut them off and say, hey, go fly out of the nest, or how does that work with those that are involved?
Sure, that is a great question, and we truly do not know. So right now, to get into the program, you need to be early in device development. So the way we're defining that is, so you have the breakthrough designation from FDA, so presumably you have some data which supported that breakthrough designation, but you haven't yet initiated that pivotal study that's going to be used for FDA's regulatory submission. And you also haven't been engaging with the FDA since having that breakthrough designation and enrolling in TAP. So that's how you get in. Now, how you get out, we don't know. We're not really sure exactly, what is the right exit point for innovators to exit TAP. So that is something that we are figuring out as we go, and any input on that is very much appreciated. Any input on the program in general is very much appreciated. So.
Great, that's great to hear. So let's open it up to you. So we've introduced all of our panelists. Do we have any questions in the audience? We have a mic here. So please, any questions? Are there any questions online? Yeah, come on up.
Thank you for organizing this session, very interesting. And I have a question for April. And, I would like to know, and this probably is published online, so I can definitely dig, but since we are here, I thought, let's take the opportunity. What is the criteria for innovators to have their products become breakthrough products for FDA? So what are the aspects that FDA takes into account for those products to become breakthroughs? Because breakthroughs is a small group, so when you have ideas to concept, you want to plan ahead to qualify. So, thank you.
Sure, that's a great question. So we do have a website. No, I'm kidding. We do, but I won't direct you to it right now. So breakthrough designation is for devices that are, have some evidence that they are going to be more effective than the current standard of care, and that they're treating a life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating disease or condition. So that's the first criteria to meet that. So your disease that you're targeting is life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating, and then you're going to be more effective than what's currently available. That's the number one. Now, once you meet that, there's then a second cohort of criteria where it's, or meet this, that, or the other, and, it's a breakthrough technology, or nothing else is cleared or approved, or you're in the best interest of patients. I always call these things that are really impossible to not address somehow if you are addressing that first one. So that first criteria is really what you need to meet.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any questions online? No? Okay. Yes, sir.
Fascinating panel. I find one of the biggest challenges for medical device companies to be reimbursement. Is there any support on that front?
I'm assuming that's to me.
To any of you. To any of you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, so TAP does collaborate with commercial payers, and of course, we do collaborate with our sister agency, CMS, under Health and Human Services. But really, our support through TAP is awareness. So we're creating training materials to help innovators kind of understand what the reimbursement landscape looks like and how to go about developing those reimbursement strategies, and then who are the correct stakeholders to be engaging with, and also when's the correct time to be engaging with them. So, for example, it's probably not the best use of resources to be talking to CMS when you're very early on in development and you're not really having a lot of clear direction of what your data plan looks like, your evidence collection strategy looks like. But you may be wanting to talk to subject matter experts that are collaborating with TAP, either their contractors or their individual stakeholders, to be getting some input from them. I'll let others answer this.
I cannot. Sorry. Okay. Yes, for startups and other companies that are going through the Blueprint MedTech, we provide, mentorship. So the mentors take them through every step of the way. Then, in addition to the mentorship, we also provide them experts in various areas. So one of the gaps or weaknesses for those early teams that we call the seedling teams, and even for teams that are funded as the what we call the optimizer program, is the reimbursement strategy. So we have experts, and experts are people who have gone through startups, taking products to the market, and this reimbursement strategy experts provide all the support they need throughout the course of the program. So we, apart from reimbursement strategy, it also helps them to understand the market, and then understanding the market more, comes with talking with stakeholders, and so the combination of talking to the stakeholders and the reimbursement strategy helps these companies or startups to address, all those concerns about reimbursement. So it's one of the strong advantages of the Blueprint MedTech.
Great, thanks. And Katie?
Just quickly, I was going to add that ABC has some resources in that we have some educational webinars for our members, which are really, it was a regulatory 101. And then we did a deep dive into CMS. After we did the regulatory 101, we found that so many people had questions. CMS, FDA, what's the difference? And so then we did this deep dive, which again led us to believe that there are other areas that we can continue to focus on. So you can look at a little plug to our website, which will give you more information as well.
And those sessions they're recorded and they're online?
Yes, they're recorded and they're online. Yes.
Okay.
So thank you, Jen, for organizing this. I have a question, and Katie gives me a hard time about this, but it's perfectly applicable here. As the son of a tailor, I'm looking for the thread. And I'm looking for the thread that unites these four presentations, and I really haven't heard it. I mean, obviously the American Brain Coalition is a unifying force, but how do you each view some holistic message that really, is the thread that unifies you?
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about the translation?
I was just thinking, listening to everybody, it's like, wow, these are awesome resources that I wish had existed, back when I started in the field. The way I talked about technology development, so going from early stage concept all the way through translational and then up to productization. And one of the hardest parts is when you're doing Gen Zero stuff, when you're not building the 15th version of something that many people have already shown they can build. There's a lot of overhead into technology development, so it's really hard to get over that early hump, not to mention when the end result is, again, as I said, like a smaller market than, say, consumer. So having, at the different early stage, mostly, these resources definitely is applicable to anybody trying to do technology development. And then having the advocacy in Congress. Actually, I've been interested in policy for a while just because I feel like that's how you make big impact and big changes. So knowing that these exist out there is definitely related to our ability to develop the technology. So that's how I see it all connecting.
Yeah, I see that too. So when we do our conferences in the Blueprint MedTech, we held a summit, inaugural summit about a month ago, and then we've had Nexus meeting about a year ago. So we're going to have one again this year. But we leverage what Katie brings, right? Advocacy groups. So we have, technologists, people who have brilliant ideas attending these conferences. They need to hear from stakeholders. They need to hear, understand some of the gaps in whatever area of interest that they have. And then even our technologists, they have to navigate through the FDA process. We have a lot of teams who have breakthrough technology. I wish I had spoken to April before now, but so we encourage constant interaction with advocacy groups, with the FDA, and Vanessa is a resource, for instance. I mean, we encourage mentorship from people who have gone through those early startups, because we have startup teams joining the Blueprint MedTech, and so she represents our classic or typical mentor in the Blueprint MedTech. So I just see that relationship, and actually we're going to follow it up from here. Really, yeah.
Yeah, great.
Thanks.
Thank
So
you.
the thread is the American Brain Coalition. How perfect is that?
Thanks for the plug, Mark.
Hi, we have a question from our online audience, which is that, this is primarily for April, which is that you said that breakthrough status is primarily sought by the actual manufacturer planning to offer the device for sale. Is there a way that TAP can help academic sponsor investigators who are not the manufacturer and thus cannot seek breakthrough status?
So that is, am I on? Okay, that is a great question. Thank you for that. So TAP comes in downstream of breakthrough. So that's outside of the scope of TAP for us to help get breakthrough. However, there's nothing in the law that says you need to be, I guess, a manufacturer per se. I mean, you can be a sponsor, innovator, developing a technology. However, you still need to meet those criteria for the breakthrough designation, and so that does include evidence for clinical and technical success, and that may include the ability to actually make the device that you're proposing. But these are questions that you can reach out to myself. I can find the right folks to talk to. We do kind of have a motto at CDRH. It's come often and come early. So we do want to hear about what innovation is going on, and we want you talking to us about those strategies.
Great, thanks, April. Vanessa, can I just bring it back to you? Because part of this weave and this thread is about the experience in industry. And you have a lot of the, bringing the perspective of being in so many different startups and early stage technologies. Can you talk a little bit about the training that you had or what you learned along the way that helped you in building partnerships and seeing how industry fits into the ecosystem of making devices and building devices to make them available?
Yeah, my mind just goes straight to my Livermore experience. Like that was, again, I felt so lucky for that to be early in my career to have experience how do you develop value proposition? Because like I said, I was cold, like literally at the time we were Googling scientists who looked like they might be interested in our devices. I was printing out their faces, finding them, hunting them down to SFN and saying, no, trust me, use our devices. So, and then learning to do your quick elevator pitch of why this is useful. And then after that, developing the trust in the relationship, like listening to what are you trying to do? How do I help you get to your end result? Like when I first started, neuroscientists, they would tell me like, well, I want this material and I want this size and I want this. And in the beginning, I was like, okay. But after a while, when they'd tell me that, I'd say, well, what are you trying to do? Are you stemming or are you chording? What part of the body? Where? What kind of animal? Here's what I think you should have. So learning to listen to what people actually are trying to do versus what they say they're trying to do, and then being a good partner in delivering. or else, they won't come back to you. It's like, so building those relationships, even writing grants, everything is a value proposition. It's what I always tell the engineers I work with, everything you're trying to do. And because we had to do it across different kinds of groups, different kinds of people, it was our bread and butter that carried on moving forward, even when you're working with vendors. So just I've said it multiple times now, relationships matter in building trust and practice, like just getting over for me, I had to get over this, fear of talking to people, especially when I was early career. It's like, oh, these giants in the field, they're not going to listen to me. But you just go, take a shot of something and walk up to them and say hi. Like, here, I build devices. You want to collaborate?
Yeah, so really getting out there and talking and networking with
Yeah.
Other potential partners that you might have.
Yeah.
Is that what you found?
Yeah,
is
and
one of those-
educating yourself, going to these conferences and listening. Where's the field going? What is the need? Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Vanessa. Any other questions before I ask another one? Yeah.
Sure, I can ask one more from the chat here. So this is going back to more of a policy question, which is that there's important differences between different types of neurotechnologies, such as clinical, translational, investigative, or consumer tech. Do you have any thoughts about how we should promote different types of legislation to prevent potential harms from these devices, as the differences can be huge within these categories?
Oh, we're going to turn to Katie on this one first. Yeah.
And I am not, I think, no, I don't know the answer to that. I know that it's, I would say advancing the field as a whole is really important. So that's kind of ABC's premise, in that, and really the educating and advancing can only advance all of us further. We say that with brain disease anyway, and we say how important it is, and how not just the comorbidities amongst the diseases, but also just the fact that, a rising tide floats all boats, and that we really need to come together. So I think in terms of, I would say, don't pin legislation against each other. I think that is never a good idea. And it's better to find more commonality, that then we can kind of raise policy together, is probably the best approach. But good question.
Well, I would argue that this is exactly where regulation supersedes legislation. And that regulation is how you fix problems that arise. Legislation can result in other problems.
So I think, but let's move away from the policy and the regulation. Is moving into, I think we're moving into more of an ecosystem where it's more of a collaborative ecosystem. So can you, Ava, you talked about how you collaborate with a lot of your mentors and you help to mentor the people that are in your program. But Katie and April, can you talk a little bit about how you do community engagement and how you help to build some of those collaborative relationships instead of looking towards, specific regulations? How do we build collaborations between various stakeholders?
Well, sure, I'll go first and use TAP as an example of that. And what's really great about TAP, so ABC has been helping through, obviously, the support of Dana in helping to have these profiles of our different organizations, so that we sort of get an idea of what they offer. And then there's a lot of different patient groups, within the same disease area, in fact, even, but they all offer something slightly different. And they have started to collaborate together as well. So what we can do is we will offer up a device company where April will say, there's different organizations that you can work with either through ABC, and so ABC will help sort of host that. But we're finding that not just the device company is finding that useful, FDA is finding it useful, the patient groups are finding it very useful, because they can work together and they can see what each other has to offer, and they've started to collaborate even more within that, which is really great. And they have found a really good relationship with FDA as well, and finding that, wow, FDA really does want to work with us. And you know, the lived experience, the patient, the reason that we're all doing what we're doing is for them. So I think that collaboration has really helped within that program as an example.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, we so appreciate the collaboration, with ABC. It really opened up the scope of TAP. And, that's my job. There's other TAP advisors like me, is to really build these relationships. And, in addition to working with innovators, one-on-one, just really information sharing across the ecosystem. Like, how do you make decisions? Let us tell you how we make decisions. How can we just build awareness across stakeholders so we kind of just know what each other are doing and what we're looking for. And it's just kind of this really free information exchange is the premise. And I was just telling Katie before this is that I knew people wouldn't dislike the idea of TAP, but really the excitement that we've seen out there in the medtech ecosystem has been really encouraging and amazing. And now people, like me coming from the FDA versus when I was an actual regulator and I would, show up and like, oh no, April's going to tell us something bad. So now I get to deliver good news. So it's been an amazing experience. And, we are open to really talk to anybody who has, skin in the game and build those relationships and, build the bridges. And, I do want to mention, with the Blueprint, we've been having conversations with NIH as well. And we really appreciate anybody and everybody who has been talking to us or who will be talking to us, especially after today's session.
Yeah, so Eva, back to you. Talk about, while we're on the topic of collaboration, talk a little bit about how the collaboration helps the people that are within the NeuroTech Harbor program.
Yeah, so the collaboration includes, advocacy groups, and it's been really helpful to teams who come in with technology looking for a solution, for instance, and then also trying to gauge what the market is. Some technologies, have broad impact, and some teams come in with a very narrow impact, but there's a broader market. Or the market they come in with is not a good fit. So through advocacy groups, people are able to reach out to people with lived experiences, and even organizations like Alzheimer's Association and so forth. And so it helps these teams to sometimes pivot to a different indication, addressing a larger market or a larger need. And then we also interacting with the FDA increasingly, and it helps to this. The startup companies especially to facilitate that or kind of remove that fear of reaching out to the FDA. Sometimes people don't want to talk to the FDA because they don't want to hear what the FDA has to say. But it's good to get those information earlier on and get it out of the way. So yeah, I think we're going to be broadening our conversations with ABC, with the FDA, and see how that can help, with these technology teams to bring their product quicker to the market.
Yeah, great, thank you. I have my stop signal, but I do want to give Vanessa the last word on collaboration in industry. You talked about partnerships, but can you just quickly say one word about the value of, sure you have a partnership on paper, but let's talk about how collaboration really brings value to industry.
Bring value to
industry.
Yeah. I guess one way I can answer that is like, what is the role of industry versus other parts? And some of the value is that, like, academic, the way I see it again is on the technology readiness level. So we want early stage work or proof of concepts in more in academic settings is how I see it. Let's leave the work of, if we can, of like reliability implementation to industry, and so that in academia we don't need to reinvent the wheel. I'm hardware heavy, so I think about interconnect. Every group shouldn't have to develop a new interconnect every time. So if we can lean on industry to do that work. And so the partnership is, we get novel technologies moving into industry, and then we move forward these early stage development in academia through industry. So it really needs to, it's the ecosystem that needs to work together for us to get from early stage through translational.
Great, that's a great way to end this panel. I want to thank our panelists, Eva, Vanessa, Katie, and April. Thank you so much.